In the middle of this picture is 24-year-old Cheng Benhua moments before her execution. Behind her sits 4 Japanese soldiers, some laughing while others smoke a cigarette. But what most people notice is that defiant smile on her face. This is the story of what happened to her before and after this picture. This is the life and death of Cheng Benhua. The cruelty of Imperial Japan throughout all of Asia is well documented, whether that be cannibalizing Indian prisoners, forcing sons to bury alive their parents, or forcing children to their grandmothers at bayonet point, as was seen during the Nanjing Massacre, or the human experiments of Unit 731, which included live vivisections with no painkillers, or pumping the stomachs of American and other prisoners of war with water and then jumping on the stomach repeatedly, causing the prisoner's abdomen to explode. There are thousands upon thousands of videos covering the atrocities of Imperial Japan throughout the internet from channels of all sizes. But there is one thing I must make clear. The atrocities seen at Nanjing or Unit 731 are not fringe cases of depravity. This was the norm of Imperial Japanese conquest. From the crucifixion of Koreans to the massacre of Filipinos at Manila, there was seldom a country or group that witnessed Imperial Japanese conquest that did not see acts of sexual and physical violence. My own grandfather, who fought in the Kuomintang against the Japanese at 16 years old, witnessed other children being kidnapped by roaming groups of Japanese soldiers. In one instance, prior to joining the army, while his group of classmates was trying to cross a bridge, a band of Japanese soldiers stopped the group and began to try to kidnap the children. My grandfather escaped, and as he was only a little child and unable to do anything, he witnessed the group of Japanese soldiers to death his childhood crush. In this story we are about to delve into, please do not forget the context and dark time of Chinese and world history this all takes place in. Born in Kaohsiung Village, He County, Anhui Province in 1914, with ancestral roots in Shandong Province, Cheng Benhua was born into a military family and raised as an upright Chinese person, conducting herself with dignity. Her family's military roots meant that from a young age she showed immense martial spirit, being both strong and brave. And while in middle school, she would join the 1194th Regiment of the Chinese Scouts, an act that her parents would disapprove of due to many scouts taking on dangerous military duties during times of war. In these scouts, she would receive training that allowed her to gain the survival skills pertinent later in her life, and also this was where she would meet and fall in love with her fellow scout and eventual husband, Liu Ziyi. Many details about her life have unfortunately been lost to history. Keep in mind of how chaotic of a time this was for China in the midst of its century of shame and humiliation, which deserves a whole separate video. And so while I want to be detailed and accurate in all of my history videos, please understand the more limited pictures and information I can give in this video. In 1931, while Cheng was 16 or 17 years old, the Japanese created a false flag incident in order to justify the invasion of Manchuria. On September 18th, 1931, at 10:20 p.m., a small amount of dynamite was placed by 1st Lieutenant Kawamoto of the 29th Infantry Regiment, a safe distance away from the tracks owned by the South Manchuria Railway. When the dynamite was detonated, the tracks sustained virtually no damage. How little damage? A train would pass by using literally those exact same tracks 10 minutes later. But this event was blamed on Chinese saboteurs, and this false flag event, called the Mukden or Manchurian Incident, would give the Imperial Japanese Army the justification to colonize Manchuria alongside creating the conditions for the full-on outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War on July 7th of 1937. On that day, a Japanese unit was conducting a nighttime military maneuver near the Marco Polo Bridge when it came under fire by a Chinese garrison who had not been informed of these maneuvers. In fact, the Japanese were conducting their maneuvers specifically outside of where they were allowed. Following the incident, the Japanese would actually claim that their maneuvers were legal and in accordance with the Boxer Protocol of 1901 that dictates the movement of foreign troops, except the area the Japanese forces were maneuvering in was still well off limits according to that same protocol. On top of a violation of protocol by conducting military maneuvers in restricted areas, keep in mind that all of this occurred at night, and a bunch of armed men in military uniforms maneuvering as if they are in battle isn't exactly not suspicious. It should also be noted that these small skirmishes have been occurring ever since the invasion of Manchuria following the Mukden incident I mentioned previously. So the Chinese forces were already on edge. Sometime during this skirmish, or shortly afterwards, the Japanese patrol saw that one of its soldiers soldiers was missing, Private Shimura. The Japanese then demanded to be allowed to enter the Chinese fortress of Wanping in order to search for this missing soldier, which they were refused, as this was a Chinese city under Chinese control and was not going to let a fully armed Japanese unit enter and start rummaging around for this soldier. Now this quote-unquote missing soldier had actually already returned to his unit by this time, and he claimed that he got lost while taking a piss and he had a stomachache. Some historians say that he actually snuck off to a brothel, but regardless, he was unharmed. But it didn't matter. The Japanese forces began to amass on the Marco Polo Bridge preparing for battle, and the Chinese, seeing that they were about to be attacked, began to fire. And thus began the Second Sino-Japanese War, also called the Anti-Japanese War, the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression, 8 Years War of Resistance, or just War of Resistance. And some, which I would agree with, also say the start of World War II. With the Anti-Japanese War of Resistance in full swing, Cheng Benhua and her husband Liu Ziyi would join the He County Anti-Japanese People's Self-Defense Army as resistance fighters. Cheng used this time to mobilize fighters from village to village. She engaged in mutual aid activities alongside teaching her fellow countrymen and women how to use spears and swords. And yes, I said spears and swords. This time in Chinese history was very bitter. This is something that I need to delve deeper into future videos, but the portrayal of the average Chinese soldier looking something like this is just wrong. In less than a year since the full-on outbreak of the war, Cheng's husband Liu would be killed while covering his comrades in a street battle. The news devastated Cheng, who would take her husband's place, leading soldiers in active combat and fulfilling her duties as a resistance fighter. During this time, she would also aid and provide intelligence for the communist New Fourth Army in their anti-Japanese efforts. On May 11, 1938, Japanese troops would breach the eastern gate of He County. In the way of the Japanese army was just one platoon of soldiers, many of whom were resistance fighters, and among them was Cheng Benhua. Their task was to cover the retreating nationalist forces in an almost certain suicide mission. Soon, the battle for the small market entrance at the eastern gate commenced. The fighting was fierce, and one by one the soldiers fell, either by the hands of the enemy or their own, refusing to be taken prisoner. In fact, of those in the platoon, every single one would be killed in battle. As for Chen, she had not yet placed a grenade over her chest, deciding to fight on and kill as many Japanese soldiers as she could before dying. But before she could die, trapped, outnumbered, and out of ammunition and supplies, she was taken prisoner. Bound and gagged, she was gang been tortured for days, yet she never gave the Japanese any information or betrayed her country to work as a collaborator. After a few days, the Japanese are getting word that a Chinese counterattack is approaching and to withdraw from their current location. Unable to get information out of her, they bound and gagged her, taking her to the western gate where other Chinese prisoners from the surrounding area were being held. Forcing her to watch, the Japanese bayoneted the Chinese prisoners to death. Witnessing the murder of these prisoners, Cheng Benhua knew that she would also be killed the same way. As the Japanese were preparing to withdraw, Cheng spotted a Japanese reporter with a camera. She asked the reporter to give her a brief moment to fix her hair and clothes before defiantly smiling at the camera as this picture was taken, and you can see the Japanese in the back mocking her actions. But this was not the only picture. A second photo was taken which captures her moments before her death. While not posing for the camera directly, that smile and look of defiance never left her face. Shortly after this second picture was taken, she was bayoneted to death. There is a misconception that the people of Japan did not know about these atrocities, that these crimes committed throughout China and the rest of Asia were secrets, only revealed at the conclusion of the war. But that couldn't be further from the truth. During the Nanjing massacre, 2 Japanese officers held a public beheading contest to see who would be the first to behead 100 civilians. This event was covered publicly by the Tokyo Nichi newspaper like a sports event. This public war crime contest was so popular that when both officers beheaded 100 civilians, they decided to behead more civilians because they couldn't agree on who reached the 100 beheadings first. As for how these pictures came to light, this first picture showed up on May 20th of 1938 in the 16th issue of the China Incident Pictorial, distributed by the Japanese Asahi Shimbun. The text next to the photo roughly translates to, "The only enemy soldier captured at the city gates of He County, female prisoner Benhua, 24 years old. Her belt bears the words Chinese Scout." This anti-Japanese diehard did not reveal any military secrets. This second, more famous picture would show up one day later in the 28th issue of the China Incident Pictorial, with text next to it roughly translated to, "In April of the 13th year of Showa, Chinese female soldier Benhua, 24 years old, captured on the battlefield in China. She always smiled fearlessly under our military interrogation, dedicating her youth to her country." Today, there is a statue of Cheng Benhua in Nanjing, remembering her actions as well as her demonstration of what it means to be an upright Chinese person, a Chinese person who was raised properly and defiant in the face of death. As for her killers, I would like to tell you all a good ending, an ending where justice is served. But the truth is that following the war, America pardoned a bunch of war criminals, many responsible for some of the most depraved and violent acts in human history. There was never any justice served. Thank you for watching, and please let me know if there's an interesting story that you want me to tell from your culture. Thank you so much for watching, and bye.